Thank you all for coming today. Being that it's Sunday, I think the first thing I want to do is pass a collection plate. But we'll get started. Thank you all for coming. And I'm one of those people, if you ever known them, that they put on glasses so they can see. I have to take mine off so I can read up close. So just so we know. But good afternoon and welcome to our third Brown versus Board of Education session. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Jim Sims. I'm the president of the Monroe County chapter of the NAACP. This afternoon, we intend to engage you in a learning experience that will inspire and compel collective action in support of preserving and educating our community on the truth. To lay the foundation for action, you will hear about freedom schools and what role they can play in this current atmosphere of inaccurate history and attempts at canceling the fundamental rights and freedoms of our Constitution. I encourage you to participate fully in this transformational opportunity. With that being said, CATS, Community Access Television Services, is recording this event, including questions. If you prefer to make a comment or questions without being recorded, please raise your hand and submit your comment on a card from one of our staff members. Dr. King coined the phrase, the fierce urgency of now, and the time to act is now. So let me introduce our speaker of the hour, Dr. Charles Nelms. Sounds kind of weird to say Charles, I know him as Charlie.
And my name is Charlie.
Is Charlie, got you, okay. Charlie is a professor emeritus of Indiana University's Office of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies, academic programs, higher education, and student affairs, as well as the author of From Cotton Fields to University Leadership. He is dedicated to the education and advancement of the youth, both here and abroad. I can think of no better way to begin today's session than to introduce you to my friend, Charlie Nelms. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Charlie Nelms.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Jimmy. Yeah. Good afternoon. Come on now, talk to me. You know, I was so looking forward to this, and you acting all anemic. Come on, talk to me. Don't tape that, brother. Okay. Look, I'm delighted to be here, but more importantly, I'm delighted that you are here, that we're all here, okay? And the NAACP is near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to start with an advertisement. If you're not a member of the NAACP, join.
Amen.
Join the NAACP. Because it is an organization that has stood in the gap for a very, very long time. And given the situation and that we're dealing with now, the NAACP is more needed than ever. Now, I want to start with a few disclaimers. Audrey, I call names when I talk, right? So let me just say, I'm neither a historian nor an attorney steeped in constitutional law, okay? I'm assumed to be octogenarian. Is that what they call it when you get to be 80? Octogenarian, that's what I am, okay? And I actually lived through this whole period of racial segregation. And we normally think about it as having occurred in the South, but it occurred right here in Bloomington, Indiana. A couple of blocks from here, you go, not even a couple of blocks, you just go right over there where the library used to be, where the colored school, and our good friend Liz Mitchell is here. There is a historic marker on that site. Am I remembering that correctly? Yes. So if you have not taken a tour of Bloomington, Indiana, to be able to identify and see some of those historic sites, I would really encourage you to do that. And you don't have to wait until Black History Month in order to do it, okay? I grew up in the Deep South. So I'm going to tell you a story, right? I'm going to tell you a story. Now, if you don't like my story, that's your problem. It's not mine, okay? But it's my story, okay? So I grew up at the height of racial segregation in the South. And when Brown versus Board of Education was decided, I was a 4th grade student attending a 2-room Rosenwald school, Julius Rosenwald School, okay, in the Arkansas Delta. And I have very vivid memories of everything about my little school, including Miss Beatrice Johnson, my teacher, who had all students in grades pre-primer through the 6th grade, Clarence. Pre-primer through the 6th grade. Now, you all call it kindergarten, that's a preschool or something, right? But pre-primer through the 6th grade. This one teacher had all of us in one room, okay? I remember the students in my class. I remember the gravel road in front of the school. I remember that pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room that provided heat. I remember that single light bulb dangling to provide light for us in that room. And I attended that little school until that school was closed. These Rosenwald schools were closed in my county. And then I was bused to Leroy McNeil School outside of Crawfordsville, Arkansas, not Indiana, Crawfordsville, Arkansas. And that's where I graduated from in 1965. At the height of racial segregation in my state and in my county, we never attended school 9 consecutive months. You chop cotton, you pick cotton, and you went to school after the harvest was completed. And that was a legalized system. And I know people like to think about South Africa as having apartheid, but apartheid was alive and well in the United States. Now, given this excessive preoccupation with race, I want to start with something that I want you to take with you, okay? First, race is a fake. Race is a social construct, not a biological, genetic, or scientific fact. It is a system of classification created by humans to categorize groups based on shared physical characteristics, ancestry, or culture, and often to establish hierarchies, assign social meaning, and to justify power imbalances. If you don't remember anything else, I say remember that. There's no biological, genetic basis for race. Now, genetic variations exist, but they do not map to the rigid, socially created categories of race. Racial segregation was and is based on a scientifically false hypothesis which says that black people are not as intelligent as white people, pure and simple. Whites who possessed a combination of wealth and political influence created policies, programs, and services that reinforced their theory of black inferiority and giving whites legal advantages. Separate but equal was never intended to be equal. And it was simply a way of skirting the law. Now, you're going to get your chance to disagree with me if you want to, and that's fine. We can have that debate, okay? I contend that education, preschool through 16, college, was and still is a mechanism used to perpetuate false theories of racial superiority of whites and the inferiority of blacks. And court rulings undoing busing, the legalization of charter schools, anti-DEI executive orders and passage of legislation in half of the states, et cetera, are all examples of this misuse of education and the reliance on race as a means of maintaining this imbalance. Second thing I want to say is that Brown versus Board of Education was not a single lawsuit. A lot of people think that Brown versus Board of Education was a single lawsuit. It was not. There were 5 lawsuits that got consolidated into one under the banner of Brown versus Board of Education. Now, those states included Delaware, Kansas, South Carolina and Virginia, and the District of Columbia, our nation's capital. Third, while only 17 states, now you all know we haven't always had 50 states, right? But there were only 17 states that really had laws on the book in 1954 when this landmark decision was rendered. 17 states had mandatory legal restrictions around race. But all of the states practiced de facto segregation. All states practiced de facto segregation, including the great state of Indiana. Now, how did white schools react to the Supreme Court decision in 1954? Many school districts completely ignored the order. My little school in Crittenden County in Crawfordsville, near Crawfordsville, did not desegregate. Now, there's a difference between desegregation and integration, but that's another story for a whole nother day, okay? They did not desegregate until 1974, which was 20 years after Brown versus Board of Education. And that was not unusual for many school districts in the southern U.S. White churches created private academies to avoid sending their children to school with black students. In instances where the court's ruling was taken somewhat more seriously, black schools were closed and the black students were bused to white schools. Rarely, if ever, were white schools closed. Now, I'm talking about lived experience. I don't know if anybody, have you written about this, Audrey? You historians, you all have written about this. Bottom line is that black principals and superintendents were fired. Black teachers were laid off. And that's that part of history that some people are uncomfortable with, that they don't want people to know about. But it's really important for us to know about that history so we can understand more fully the kinds of things that are happening today. By 1975, there were 3,500, more than 3,500 white church academies operating throughout the South. You hear people talking about white nationalism? Do a little research so you can better understand now and then. In Prince Edward County in Virginia, they closed the schools for 5 years rather than comply with the court order. In Charlottesville, Norfolk, and Warren County, they closed their schools for a period in 1958. So here's my impromptu quiz for all of you. Who uttered these words? Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. George Wallace. And who was George Wallace? You got it. You get an A. What was it like to be a student at a segregated black school in 1954? School buildings were poorly constructed, equipped, and maintained. Black teachers' salaries were as much as 50% less than their white counterparts right down the road. Books and other learning materials at black schools had been previously used by white students. I do not ever remember having had access to a brand new textbook growing up. And you got the textbook and the kid had written the names in it. They had, how you write in the margins and so on and so forth. And that was just a given. The school buses that we used, they'd all been previously used by the white kids. Everything had been previously used by white kids except the chalk. And that's not hyperbole. Everything had been previously used except the chalk, because the chalk wears out. You can't reuse the chalk. Classrooms were, my library in my school was about half the size of this room. Half the size of this room. It was not unusual for one teacher to have 5 or 6 preps in a day. So I had Mr. Jefferson. I had him for algebra, I had him for general math, I had him for geometry, I had him for physics, I had him for chemistry. He was the only person. There were no foreign languages at my school. We didn't have a counselor, but yet the school was classified as a Class A school, meaning that it had a college preparatory course of study. How did we get to this whole notion of freedom schools? Before we had freedom schools, there was something called Freedom Summer. You remember that, Audrey? You're not old enough to remember, literally. You remember that? Anyone else here from the Deep South? Georgia, Alabama, Florida, any of those states? They call them Southeast now, Vicki. But they're the Deep South, okay? But there was something called Freedom Summer. You remember these names? James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Swerner. You remember what happened to them? They were murdered in Mississippi. Summer of 1964. Freedom Summer was organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Congress for Racial Equality, those two groups. And they had some other partners to work with them. And Freedom Summer centered on several things. One, voter registration. Freedom schools, and the Mississippi Democratic Party. Now, do you all remember the Mississippi Democratic Party? You don't remember that? Well, go check out AI on Google or whatever your app is, okay? And you can check that out, okay? The Democratic, you don't remember that? But anyway, you remember the convention that occurred in Chicago? Did they seat the members of that party? They weren't seated, right? Okay, gotcha. That's enough. Freedom schools grew out of that Freedom Summer. Freedom schools were not designed as comprehensive schools. They were not designed to replace a comprehensive curriculum in a high school or a middle school or an elementary school. The curriculum was focused on subjects that inspired students to become agents of change. And there were 3 areas of emphasis: academic, citizenship, and recreational. Here's something I want you to take with you. Once you learn to read, you will forever be free. Who said that? Hello, come on, look up here. Come on, Frederick Douglass. Once you learn to read, have you ever wondered why people didn't want black people to read? No. Why did they not want him to read? Why was it against the law, Audrey? Tell us.
Because reading opens up your mind to alternative ways of being and living. Because you read, you can see it.
Yeah. That's right. So reading was punishable by lashing and just all kinds of mean ways of punishing people for learning to read. Now, why was the Bible? They didn't have Weekly Reader. You all remember Weekly Reader? Some of you old enough to remember the Weekly Reader. They didn't have a Weekly Reader, right? So what did we learn to read? What did black people learn to read on most often? From what? The Bible. And that was the one thing that Massa would permit you to read. That was the Bible. Now, how many of you have ever heard of the N Bible? Don't be ashamed, yeah.
Is that the one that was only a partial Bible that left out all the good news about
Yeah.
the book of Exodus?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I tend to say the word because the word is real, okay? And in real history, it's not the N word. So I just have to use your imagination, okay? But there was something called the N Bible. And they left out selectively certain parts of that Bible. Here were the core subjects. Intensive instruction in reading. Reading. Now, I know they have something now, they used to have it called Reading is Fundamental. You all remember that? Some of you may have had children who use that curriculum. Intensive instruction in reading, writing, general mathematics, and science. Language arts, students practice creative writing, poetry, inspired by figures like Langston Hughes, and journalism by publishing their own Freedom School newspaper. Foreign languages. Some schools offered advanced subjects not available to local black students, such as French. I just told you that I attended a school where no one had a foreign language. That was just a given. And then Mr. Poundsy, the superintendent, would come by and he would show up. That's okay, I'm gonna move on, because I get angry and upset. People say, the preacher said this morning, should we get angry? He used the scripture. But yeah, I'm angry, yeah. But I'm not so angry that I'm out of control, okay? Students practice creative writing, poetry. You memorize things. Rote memory was a recognized form of learning. When Melinda Sings. You know whose poem that is? When Melinda Sings?
Dunbar.
Paul Laurence Dunbar, published in 1901. I have a copy of the book, published in 1901. I wanted to bring it with me because I was afraid y'all would tear it up, but it's very fragile. It's very fragile. And I really do have a copy of it, okay? But the handling of it is very. Hold fast to dreams. Langston Hughes. There's a new stamp out now, Phyllis Wheatley.
First poet to publish in America. Black poet.
The first black poet to publish in America. Did you know that, Clarence?
I knew she was important.
You knew she was important. Okay, good enough. Who were the teachers at Freedom Schools? Who were the teachers at Freedom Schools? Who were the teachers at Freedom Schools? Talk to me now. Talk to me now.
Those that went to historically black colleges and universities.
Who were the teachers? Just hold that one. Hold it. Hold it. Jim Sims? Jimmy? Okay, gotcha. Anyone else? The majority of the teachers at Freedom School were white kids from the North. The majority of the teachers were white kids from the North. Now, I'm not saying there weren't blacks, because there were, okay? But this whole Freedom Summer meant that there were white kids from the North who were more progressive, okay, who came south to help with the voter registration. And obviously you had, so you take Fisk University, for example, Marion Wright Edelman, okay, was one of those students in college, okay, who was part of that movement. And obviously she's a black woman, or she is a black woman, okay? But the majority of the teachers were white kids from the North. They were volunteers. They had no health insurance. They had no, if they had it, it was by their parents, okay? They were volunteers, okay? And they lived with the parents of the students they taught. Okay? They lived in the homes of the parents of the kids, students that they taught. Okay? Do we still have freedom schools today? Do we have freedom schools today? Come on, talk to me now. Come on, talk to me. Ms. Boone, do we have freedom schools? The young junior high school, junior college, do we have freedom schools? Because you have a piece that you've done some research on. Speak up a little bit.
I feel like there are more special programs now than like an actual
Yeah.
school, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, for example, kind of like Banneker, though it's not like a freedom school, it's more like a summer camp. So
Okay.
like special programs.
Okay. Now.
Banneker's not a freedom school.
Yeah. So we're going to agree to disagree. There are freedom schools today. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 to 100 freedom schools in the U.S. Okay? And they are sponsored, operated under the auspices of the Children's Legal Defense Fund, the Legal Defense Fund, Marion Wright Edelman. And what they do is they get grants from foundations, from individuals, the church congregations that support them and that kind of thing, okay? And what they do is they bring in interns from colleges and universities around the country, and they have worked, and they still work with colleges and universities to get them to be a sponsoring entity for the Freedom School. But they're not as widespread, okay? But there are freedom schools. But keep in mind, freedom schools were not and are still not designed to be comprehensive schools. To your point, Ms. Boone, they are schools that provide supplemental, you didn't use this term, but I use the term supplemental instruction, okay? And that supplemental instruction is more related to the history, okay? So on and so forth, okay? The Children's Defense Fund, Marion Wright Edelman. One of her most famous books, Letter to My Sons, is that the name of it? Letters to My Son. So she has written this, this book is quite old now, but it's a wonderful book, it's still relevant, okay? So here's some questions that we need to ponder. But before I get there, I'm gonna share with you, how many of you attended the 2022 Martin Luther King celebration at the Busker Chumley? If you did, you will have in your program, okay, an initiative. And that initiative is called I need to get up here so you can record. It has something called the One Community Curriculum Overview, the One Community. The One Community. And when I was, and I knew I remember seeing this someplace, okay? And this is very much akin to what a freedom school curriculum might look like, okay? And they have an initiative, first grade, Envisioning a Better World. Third grade, second grade, Fair versus Equal. And a lot of people tend to think about fairness and equal being the same, you know, treating everybody the same. And they say that's fair. Treat everyone the same, and that's fair. Third grade, conflict resolution. Fourth grade, who am I? Exploring identity. 5th grade, bias awareness. 6th grade, strength and unity. Now, I'm lifting this up as an example, okay? And Gloria Howell shared with me a much more expansive kind of curriculum guide that the people who were on that commission actually worked to develop, okay? And this was implemented in a couple of, not in the public schools in Bloomington, but at the Montessori school, as I recall. And what was the other school, Gloria? The project school, okay? Now, why am I lifting this up, okay? I'm not suggesting, and I want to make sure that you don't leave here thinking that Charlie Nelms is recommending that we replace public education with a volunteer system, okay? That is not a comprehensive system of education and so on and so forth. But I do want you to leave here thinking that just because you do public education that you have really received a complete education. That's what I want you to leave here with, okay? And so we have the opportunity to provide more of a supplemental kind of education, okay? Anyone have any questions about that now? Okay. Because there are certain requirements that you have to meet in order to satisfy state requirements in terms of education and so on and so forth. And I'm not here to beat up on that. I'm just simply saying it's not a complete form of education. And we need to make sure that young people leave with a more comprehensive knowledge base, okay? Clara, you can tell me. Clara and I are Sunday school classmates. So here's a question for you. Here are my questions for you. Is there a current knowledge void or need that freedom schools can fill? So I want us to substitute for freedom schools, I want us to substitute Summer Academy or Freedom Academy. So we make a distinction between some things, okay? Is there a current knowledge void or need that, let's just call them freedom schools, that freedom schools can meet? Liz Mitchell. That's your question. Okay, think about it. I'll come back to you. I'm not in a hurry. I'll come back to you. Clarence Boone.
Yes, sir.
Here's your question. Are there selective components of the Freedom School curriculum that we can effectively and more successfully address? Are there selective components of the Freedom Schools curriculum that we can effectively and successfully address?
Implementing the current curriculum, say in NCCSC,
Yeah,
as an
yeah,
example, fair and equal.
Yes.
Discussions on fair and equal, discussions on really a Black history component. Try to introduce that in some schools, and they have connection things.
Yeah. So what do you say to people say you just need to get over it? Why do you keep dwelling on history, this Black history stuff? Slavery was a long time ago. I didn't have anything to do with it. Yes, ma'am.
Because it explains a lot about...
Speak up just a little bit.
It explains a lot about why why the rate of home ownership is lower among blacks than among whites, and numerous economic, certainly, disparities that if you didn't realize that they were systemic, you could think that it meant blacks aren't as good at obtaining homes as whites.
Okay. Oh, yes, Mrs. Moon. Speak up just a little bit. The senior citizen has difficulty hearing. Come on.
Implement like us.
Why don't you stand up? We can hear you.
If we implement like teachings at the Freedom School, it could help us learn from our past and understand that certain politicians or something, like kind of see that if they pass certain legislations, how that could revert us to the past. And, like, I feel like it would help us learn from our past and try to make for a better future for like the generations.
Okay.
onward.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Well, Black history is being erased. I mean, that's.
We don't have white history. Why you want to have black history?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so shocking to me, is why we need all the help we can get with, different schools or academies or whatever, to recognize history, because people in power are trying to erase it.
Okay. Now, I'm not saying you don't need black history. I'm just throwing out, I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that. I mean, I don't want anyone to leave here thinking I'm saying that. But there are people who say, why do you keep dwelling on this black history? I didn't have any slaves. I didn't discriminate against anybody. So what do you say to that?
I think you can't understand anything that's going on without understanding the full history of the country. I mean, I don't think it's this piece or that piece.
Sure.
I think if we don't recognize what happened here, how do we have any idea of what's going on? How can we even begin to understand?
Yeah. Doris?
I think it's just not black history, it's the history of our United States. And so I think it's something that we all need to learn, because it wasn't just white men who helped make our country great. It was black men and women as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I think there's the saying that if you don't learn from your history, you're going to repeat it. And so the question is, we don't need, why do you have black history? We have white history. Well, white history is what we all learn in school, right? White men discovered everything, right? We came to this country and they got discovered. Never mind the people that lived here, right? You say, well, the South and this country was built, was good old, Carnegie and the Ford family and all those people, but it was the free labor from the South that was the foundation for all the work that they did. So if you don't mention that, then it's like it's like magical. Something magical happened. They all got rich from magic. So you have to say, no, they had free labor.
It was black magic.
Yeah, so that's the importance of the history. To say that we're not going to have black history, we're going to have factual history.
Honest.
Right.
Okay. No, Clarence, I'm not going to call it.
Because the big
I'm
insult
going to get you to
was a slap in the face when former Senate Majority Leader Mr. McConnell said, I didn't own slaves, but I can't say that my great-grandfather didn't. He probably did, and there's nothing I could do about it. And it's deep Southern wrong. And I had to process that. And then we jump ahead to the future where, as she said, they're erasing black history. So, I mean, we got to do something.
Yeah. Let me suggest a way to think about it a little differently.
Okay.
They're selectively erasing history. History is being selectively erased. Not just black history, but history is being selectively erased. Disproportionately, perhaps, black history. If they say there are certain books you cannot read, they have to be banned, and so on and so forth, okay? But it is American history, I think, which is the point that I understand you, Doris, to be making. Is it American history? Is it American history?
American history, yes.
Okay, I just want to know. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it seems to me that one of the consequences of having had slavery in this country is that people of color are still held under. And until those consequences are resolved, you can't move beyond stories need to be told so that people have an understanding. And it's this, the unfairness that continues through our whole country. It's just.
Yeah. So the first step is acknowledgement, I guess, is what I that's my takeaway from what you're saying. The first step is to acknowledge.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
No, I mean, the White House was built with slave labor.
Yeah.
Among other institutions.
But they're gonna tear it down and make America great again. I just had to say that, but anyway, I'm hold the point. But I got what you got. So I'm going here to Liz, and then I'm going to go to the masked woman next to Liz. Yeah.
Well, there are some people that just don't want to feel uncomfortable, and if they believe the narrative that their particular race is going to be wiped out in about 20 years, and they're going to receive their comeuppance, I'm not going down without a fight. And it seems to me that's where we are now. I'm not going out without a fight. My people came here and made this country what it is today, and I got to preserve that.
Okay.
So talking about slavery and anything like that makes me uncomfortable. We're not going to do that.
But why are you uncomfortable, Liz?
Guilt.
Yeah.
But why are you guilty? You didn't own any slaves.
We don't want to talk about the negatives. We only want to talk about the positives at
Okay.
this point.
Okay, I'm just
And if
asking.
that's a negative issue, we can't talk about that.
Audrey, I'm gonna come to you. I know you're anxious to say something. I see you on the edge of your seat. But anyway, Ms. Bridgewater.
When they ask the question, why can't you just let go of the past, meaning the past as it relates to people of color, the past is present. The same racism they used to justify slavery is the same racism they use today to justify inequities in housing practices, inequities in employment practices, the healthcare issues, but it's now, how do you say, not overt, but covert.
Okay.
But it's the same foundational racism that has institutionalized the discrimination that people of color deal with, fight against, struggle with, live with every day.
Okay.
So the past is
Yeah. So let me just say, I just gotta ask you, what is a person of color? Help me.
well,
Help me. What's a person of color?
Black and brown.
Huh?
It's a euphemism.
non-white.
Hold that thought, Audrey.
That's part of a whole new thing.
But is that one drop rule still around?
Well, I was going to go on what Liz was saying, and I want to quote a very famous, one of the best American novelists, and I'm not talking about Toni Morrison, who was my favorite. I'm talking about William Faulkner, a Mississippian. He had the quote that the past is never dead. It's not even the past. And this is a Mississippian. You know, we know what Mississippi means. So he understood the volumes of the history that began in slavery is always here. It's not past, it's not dead. Because where did white supremacy come from? Where did it come from, Charlie?
What did you ask?
White supremacy. How did that generate itself? How did people say all of a sudden, I'm better than you, I'm white? Where did that come from?
Well, it came from white people who were born with privilege, and they wanted to make sure that they continued to have that privilege. So it was this kind of philosophy that they perpetrated through the passage of laws and rules and regulations which ceded power to them in a perpetual kind of way. So when people say, let's make America great again, so where did it come from? It came from the very people who wanted to preserve and perpetuate their status. So what would you say? Where did it come from?
Well, I agree with you, but I think it was more systematic than that.
More systematic?
Systematic, yeah.
Mhm.
I think you had pillars of it. First, you had the Bible that you said they had another version of us.
Yeah.
And so you could justify, using the Bible,
Sure.
you could justify Ham and his descendants, right,
Mhm.
as being inferior. Then you had pseudoscience.
Yeah.
You know, these eminent scientists, you know,
Yeah.
and they're still doing it today.
Yeah.
Did you read in New York Times about this study that got under the wire, or where they're separating black kids and measuring their brains against white kids? So it's still that kind of neo-scientific,
Sure.
pseudo-scientific. So they needed the Bible, they needed the scientists, and they also needed practice. You know, cops,
Sure.
slave drivers, all those.
Sure.
So you need those pillars, you know, to keep things.
Sure.
Like ice now, that's a pillar of it.
Yeah, good point.
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Now, I missed somebody a long time ago. I want to come back. I don't know your name, but pardon me for pointing at you. But had you finished what you were saying?
I don't know how well thought out it was. I would have to think some more.
Okay.
But I would say, I grew up in Indiana, and when we were young adults, he had a job opportunity in Memphis, Tennessee, and we were shocked when we moved there and began to interact with our neighbors and the community around us, because we thought things were better. Coming from Michigan, coming from Indiana, we thought things were better than we found them to be when we lived in Memphis. And we were told by our real estate agent, you don't want to live in this community, you want to be in this community, and kind of directed in that way. And she talked about schools and such. We were expecting our first child, and it wasn't very long before we figured that we were just in the wrong place. And it was about 2 years later that we moved to Oak Park, Illinois, being a more integrated community with public schools that were worthy of our children, that we wanted them to be educated, but we also wanted them to be integrated with other kinds of people, whatever their culture they were. And at the time, Oak Park schools were, I think, something like 40% minority, some Spanish, some Indian, many black people. And we just thought that was a better thing for our family.
I hear you. Jimmy, you trying to call me to stop?
I am, but as a segue to young Mrs. Boone, my thoughts has to do more with systemic racism that this country was basically built on, and I think in terms that it's a lot easier to try to pull off a redistricting plan because we already have redlining as an example. So I think from that standpoint, to me, you have to go all the way back and basically dismantle that you can, the systemic policies in which this country is built on. But I said that, and I know this is bad timing. I'd like to segue to this.
No, I'm not ready yet. No, I'm not ready to segue yet. No, I'm only giving you a rough time. I want y'all to take 4 things with you. Stop looking to other people to correct the problem. We are they. We are the they. And I said, we're the people we've been waiting for. Claude has a book out now, We're the Leaders We've Been Waiting For. I think that's the title of the book, Eddie Claude. So stop looking outside of ourselves for solutions to the challenges that we face. Number 2, if you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, great-nieces, nephews, neighbors, share reading materials with them. accurate historically accurate reading materials with them. You don't need permission to do that. Just do it. I was walking at the mall I'm almost finished, Miss Moon. I was walking at the mall the other day. Little 6-month-old baby just beating on that, whatever that thing was, just beating on it, okay? Beating on it in the sense that we've started having our kids be attended to by technological instruments, things that they can't even understand, and so on and so forth. So buy some books. Share some books with them. And give them as gifts. And I'm serious about this. Third thing you can do is don't remain silent. When you see things and hear things and know things that are historically inaccurate and even contemporarily inaccurate, say something. Say something. Don't just sit there and just say, and just sort of cower under the table, under your seat. Say something. And the third thing you do is you make sure, even if you don't have any children in the school system, become advocates for kids to make sure that they get a complete education. So the banning of books doesn't do any good for us to twiddle our thumbs and worry, oh, they say we can't read that, okay? What did you say when the governor of Florida came out against the advanced placement course in Black history? What did you say? Were you not bothered by it? What did you say? What did you do? When the governor of Indiana signed an anti-DEI, what did you do? Did you do anything but just say turn the television off or turn the volume down or put it on silent? What did you do?
I did write to my
Pardon, you did, right, you did write to. I'm glad you did, because so many people said it doesn't matter. So I'm not going to even bother, but it does matter. We can't allow our voices to be silenced. Ms. Boone, come on, take it away, sister.
Thank you, Charles.
You want me to stand up here so I can say? No, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that speech, Mr. Nelms. Good afternoon, friends, elders, educators, organizers, and freedom fighters. I'm Anaya Boone, and I'm a junior at Bloomington High School South, and I'm the president of the NAACP Bloomington branch of the Youth Council. Freedom schools were not simply just summer school programs. They were not remedial classrooms. They were not a charity. Freedom schools were acts of resistance. They were born in a moment when the United States was very clear about who education was for and who it was not for. In the Jim Crow South, Black children attended underfunded, overcrowded schools with outdated books, if they were allowed to attend school at all. Their history was erased, their brilliance denied, their futures were intentionally narrowed. So, in 1964, during what we now call Freedom Summer, young people, many of them college students, many of them risking their lives, joined Black communities in Mississippi to do something radical. They taught the truth. Freedom schools emerged from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the SNCC, and the broader civil rights movement. They were designed to do what segregated public schools refused to do: educate Black children to understand their history, their power, and their right to shape democracy. At the heart of freedom schools was a simple yet revolutionary idea: education should prepare you to be free, not obedient, not quiet, not grateful for scraps, but free. The curriculums centered questions most schools avoided. Why are things the way they are? Who has power? Who decides? And what is my responsibility to change unjust systems? Students read Black authors. They studied African and African American history. They talked openly about racism, voter suppression, poverty, and violence. They learned how the Constitution worked and how it failed them. They practiced speaking, debating, and organizing. Freedom schools didn't just ask students to memorize facts. They asked them to analyze power. And that terrified the status quo. Because an educated child who understands understands injustice is a dangerous thing to unjust systems. Freedom schools were also deeply communal. They operated in churches, basements, living rooms, and community centers. Parents were involved. Elders were involved. Local leaders helped shape the learning. The school did not belong to the state. It belonged to the people. And let's be clear, this work was dangerous. Freedom school teachers were harassed, threatened, and sometimes even arrested. Churches were bombed. Organizers were beaten. 3 young men, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Scherner, were murdered for their work that summer. So we speak of freedom schools, we must speak with reverence. This was not a symbolic education, this was education under siege. And yet, students showed up. They showed up hungry for knowledge, hungry for truth, hungry for a future larger than what segregation allowed them to imagine. Many freedom school students went on to become organizers, teachers, elected officials, and community leaders, not because freedom schools promised careers, but because they cultivated courage. So what made freedom schools different? First, they were explicitly political, not partisan, but political in the true sense, concerned with power, participation, and justice. Second, they were student-centered. Young people's questions, lived experiences, and voices shaped the learning. Third, they were grounded in dignity. Freedom schools assumed Black children were not broken, behind, or deficient. They assumed the system was. And finally, they were rooted in collective responsibility. Learning was not just for personal advancement, it was for community survival. Now, some people hear this history and say, that was then. They want to believe freedom schools belong to the past. But let's ask ourselves, are schools today fully funded and equitable? Is Black history taught honestly and completely? Are students encouraged to question injustice? Is civic education expanding or being restricted? Across this country, we are witnessing book bans, curriculum gag orders, attacks on educators, and the criminalization of honest teaching. We see renewed effort to control what young people are allowed to see and know about race, gender, history, and democracy itself. That should sound familiar, which means the spirit of Freedom School is not behind us, it is calling us forward. And this is where the work of today's scholars and educators meets the legacies of yesterday's movement builders. At the 2025 22nd American Educational Research Association Annual Brown Lecture, Dr. James A. Banks, a giant in multicultural education, issued a clear and urgent call to action. He called for transformative civic education, an education that prepares young people not just to participate in democracy as it exists, but to reimagine and improve it. Dr. Banks emphasized that this kind of civic education must help young people develop cultural, national, and global identities, not ones at the expense of others, but all at once. He spoke directly to youth, but also reminded us that work is for all of us because democracy is not sustained by children alone. That call should sound familiar to us because freedom schools were doing that exact thing decades ago, helping young people understand that who they were culturally, how they were positioned nationally, and how their struggle was connected to a global movement for liberation. Transformative civic education is not new, it is a continuation. It asks us to move beyond surface level inclusion and toward deep engagement with power, history, and responsibility. It asks us to prepare young people to live with complexity, to hold multiple identities, and to see themselves as agents of change, not just consumers of information. And if we are honest, it asks something of us too. It asks adults to keep learning. It asks educators to keep telling the truth, and it asks communities to protect spaces where critical thinking can thrive. Freedom schools remind us that education has always been a battleground, and neutrality in times of injustice is a choice that sides with power. They remind us that young people are not too young to understand oppression or to imagine liberation. They remind us that communities do not need permission to teach their children the truth. And they remind us that progress has never come from comfort, it has come from courageous collective action. Today, we invoke freedom schools. Today, when we invoke freedom schools, we are not engaging in nostalgia. We are making a claim that education should liberate, a claim that truth-telling is not optional, a claim that democracy requires informed, empowered people. Freedom schools asks us the hard questions. Are we willing to invest young people beyond test scores? Are we willing to defend educators who teach honestly? And are we willing to build spaces where truth, history, and justice are centered?
And perhaps the most important question, are we willing to trust the next generations and ourselves with the truth? In closing, let us remember, Freedom Schools were not perfect. They were improvised, under-resourced, and short-lived in formal structure. But they were also profoundly productive. They shifted consciousness. They built leaders. They helped bend the arc of history. Today, as we face renewed rollbacks of progress, renewed attacks on truth, and renewed attempts to narrow who belongs in our democracy, we would do well to remember their lesson. Freedom Schools remind us that education has never been neutral, and neither can we be. Thank you, and I now turn it over to President Sims.
Are you all as proud of her as I am? Thank you. So now the question before us is not whether Freedom Schools matter. The question is, what will we do with what we know? Too often, in moments like this, we leave inspired but paralyzed, feeling the weight of the moment and wondering, what can I actually do? Where do I even start? Let me be clear, here is something you can do. Freedom Schools were never built by perfect systems. They were built by courageous communities who decided they could not wait. We cannot wait for policies to catch up. We cannot wait for institutions to become brave. We cannot wait for permission. Now is the time to build. Here in Monroe County, we have young people, such as who you heard from this afternoon, who are hungry for truth. They're hungry for history and hungry for belonging. We have educators, parents, elders, students, organizers, and faith leaders who understand that democracy does not sustain itself. Educated, engaged people sustain it. Bringing Freedom Schools back to life will not look like a replica of 1964. It will look like us, responding to this moment in this place with courage and care. And this work must be community-led. The NAACP, and let me back up, Monroe County NAACP Education Subcommittee is not here to own this work. We are here to walk alongside it. We will crawl with you if that's where you are. We will walk with you when you're ready. We will run when the moment demands it. The subcommittee chair will handle the administrative work, connecting people, coordinating communication, but the vision, the leadership, and the power must come from you all, from us all, the community. Because Freedom Schools have always belonged to the people. So today, we are circulating sign-up sheets for a Freedom School Steering Committee. Signing your name is not a lifetime contract. It is a declaration of possibility. It is you saying, I am willing to explore. I am willing to learn. I am willing to help build. This is how movements begin, not with certainty, but with commitment. Freedom Schools teach us that education is how freedom learns to last. They remind us that silence has never moved us forward. Education has. And they call us to remember that freedom is not something we wait for. Freedom is a learned practice. So I invite you, no, I urge you to take a step today. Try it, do something, sign your name, start the work. Because we cannot wait for systems to change, we must build now. And if we do, together, Monroe County can once again become a place where truth is the curriculum, justice is the outcome, and freedom is brought to life. Now, committee members will work around the room to pass around sign-up sheets. Please feel the urge, the need to sign this sheet and help us with this work. As we prepare to close, I want to pause and offer gratitude because gatherings like this do not happen without people showing up with intention, generosity, and courage. First, we want to thank Dr. Charlie And I knew the difference. Dr. Charlie Nelms for his powerful words and leadership today. Thank you, sir. Your reflections reminded us what it means to stay rooted in justice, in truth, and possibility, even when progress is challenged. We also are deeply grateful to Anaya Boone for grounding us in the history of Freedom Schools. I thank her for reminding us that this work is not abstract. It is not new. It has always been filled by communities who refuse to accept silence or erasure. I want to extend sincere thanks to the members of the NAACP Education Committee who helped bring this convening to life, members of which are Dr. Gloria Howell. Wave your hand, everybody, as we take your name. Miss Vivian Bridgewaters Gray. Miss Ruth Ite. Miss Ralph Shaw back here in the corner. And School Subcommittee Chair and our Education Committee Chair, Miss Maria Douglas. We also want to offer thanks to Jeremy Graham. Many of you know Jeremy, and he was to help our welcoming table. But if you know Jeremy, you know that him and his wife gave birth to a healthy and happy little boy 2 days ago. And now Jeremy is a realtor with Century 21, the Graham team, him and his wife. So we want to wish him well and thank him. I know he was with us in spirit, so just wanted to point that out. And finally, thank you, attendees. Thank you for being here, for listening, for reflecting, and for being willing to imagine what comes next. Showing up is not passive, it is a choice. Today reminded us that Freedom Schools was never about nostalgia. They were about necessity. They were built when communities refused to wait for systems to catch up with justice, and that lesson still holds today. We are living in a moment that demands courage, imagination, and action. And while it's easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of where to begin, today we made one thing clear. We do not have to wait. We do not have to do this alone. If you feel called to help bring the spirit of Freedom Schools back to the life here in Monroe County, we invite you to sign up for the steering committee. This is a community-led effort. The NAACP Education Subcommittee will support and walk alongside, but the vision and the power must come from the community. I will add that we have a very strong partnership and good working relationship with the administration and the superintendent of Monroe County Community Schools. So that is also going to help us as we move forward. Now, not that we're going to change their curriculum or change their methods per se, but they do listen. I will assure you that. Now, whether you're ready to crawl, walk, or run, this is a place for you. Because education is how freedom learns to last. Because democracy does not sustain itself, people do. And because the time to build is not someday, that time is now. Now, before I fully close, as always, I'd like to acknowledge part of the strength that I have to stay engaged with the community and work hard. And that's my lovely wife, Dora Sims, who supports me all along the way. I must do that. And I don't intend to be self-serving, but I also think it carries the message. Don't so much worry about the author, but absorb the message, I think. So at some point, grab a blue magazine, turn to page 12, look at that article up there, and I hope it just permeates your soul and invigorate you to help continue our work. That's all I'll say about that. Just grab your blue magazine and let's talk about that later. Thank you for being here and thank you for your courage. Thank you for helping carry this work forward. Thanks again to my friend Dr. Nelms. Safe travels, and we look forward to building together. Thank you all.